The rugged wilderness outside Elk Mountain holds many secrets, but none as extraordinary as this. A lone Mustang stands motionless on a ridge, ears perked forward, sensing something no human could detect in a ravine below. Hidden from the world lies a crashed car with a tiny passenger running out of time. What happens next defies explanation. A wild horse's desperate attempt to save an infant trapped in wreckage. A journey that will forge an unbreakable bond between animal and child and ultimately change the fate of an entire community. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Elk Mountain's eastern ridge as a lone Mustang grazed among the wild grasses, his coat GLE copper. In the early light, muscles rippling beneath his hide as he moved with the natural grace of a creature born to this rugged landscape. The locals had spotted him occasionally over the years, a survivor, a holdout from the once thriving herds that had roamed these mountains for generations. Suddenly the Mustang's head jerked up, ears swiveling forward. He stood motionless, nostrils flaring. Something had changed in his world. A sound, a scent, a disturbance in the natural order of things. For several moments he remained frozen, as if listening to a distant call that no human ear could detect. Without warning, he bolted, powerful, legs carrying him across the rocky terrain with purpose and urgency. He moved not with the random flight of a startled animal, but with deliberate direction, as if drawn by some invisible force miles away on the winding mountain road that connected Elk Mountain to the nearest city. Jessica Johnson clutched her infant daughter Emma to her chest. The young mother's eyes darted nervously to the road ahead as dark clouds gathered above the mountain peaks. "Maybe we should turn back," she said, glancing at her husband Robert, who drove with both hands firmly on the wheel. The weather report said there might be storms. Robert shook his head, eyes still on the treehouse curves ahead. "We can't miss this appointment, Jess. Dr. Bennett is the only specialist within 100 miles who can help with Emma's condition." Jessica nodded reluctantly, looking down at their 6-month-old daughter's peaceful, sleeping face. Emma had been born with a heart condition that required regular monitoring. Today's appointment had been scheduled for weeks. "I know," she sighed. "I just hate this road, especially when the weather turns." As if summoned by her words, the first heavy raindrops began to strike the windshield quickly, intensifying into a downpour that reduced visibility to mere feet ahead of their sedan. "Robert, please slow down," Jessica pleaded, her arms tightening protectively around Emma. "I am slowing down," he assured her, leaning forward as he strained to see through the curtain of water. "We'll be fine. Just another 20 minutes and we'll be." His words were cut short as their car hit a patch of mud washing across the road. In an instant, the vehicle began to hydroplane, tires losing all purchase on the slick surface. Robert fought the wheel as Jessica screamed. The car spun wildly twice before crashing through the guardrail and plummeting down the steep ravine below. The impact came in violent stages, metal crumpling against rock glass, shattering, the car rolling once before coming to rest on its side against a cluster of pines halfway down the slope. Then silence, broken only by the steady drumming of rain and the occasional groan of stressed metal. Cooling in the downpour inside the wreckage, Jessica hung limp against her seatbelt. Blood streaming from a gash on her forehead, Robert was motionless, pinned between the steering wheel and his seat. And little Emma, torn from her mother's arms by the 4x4 of the crash, lay in her car seat, which had been ripped from its base and flung into the back of the vehicle. The baby's cries, weak but persistent, went unheard by her unconscious parents. They went unheard by the occasional car passing on the road above. Drivers focused on navigating the treacherous conditions. They went unheard by anyone who might have helped anyone, that is, except a copper-colored Mustang who had never before approached this part of the mountain. The wild horse picked his way carefully down the slope, hooves finding purchase where human feet would have slipped and fallen. He moved with determination, pausing occasionally to lift his head and listen. The rain had begun to ease, but water still streamed down the hillside, making the descent treacherous. When the Mustang reached the crashed vehicle, he circled it cautiously, nostrils flaring at the strange sense of gasoline, metal, and blood. He stopped at the shattered rear window where, Emma's cries had weakened to whimpers. The horse lowered his head, nickering softly as if in response to the infant's distress. For several long moments he remained beside the car, occasionally pawing at the ground or pushing his muzzle toward the window. Then with sudden decision he turned and galloped back up the slope toward the road above. On that same road, Lily Harrison sat in the back seat of her parents' truck, her face pressed against the window as she watched raindrops race down the glass. At 8 years old, Lily had always been different from other children. Quieter, more observant, with an uncanny connection to animals that both delighted and concerned her parents. Dad stopped the car. She suddenly cried out, sitting bolt upright. Tom Harrison glanced in the rearview mirror at his daughter. "What is it, Lily? There's a horse on the road. He needs help." Maya Harrison turned in the passenger seat to look at her daughter. "Honey, there's no horse out there. It's just the rain playing. Tricks on your eyes, no, Mom. He's real." Lily insisted, her voice rising with urgency. "Please, Dad, stop the car." Something in his daughter's tone made Tom slow the vehicle he'd learned over the years. That Lily's unusual instincts were rarely wrong, especially when it came to animals. As the truck rounded the bend, headlights illuminated a sight that made both parents gasp. A wild Mustang stood in the middle of the A-road, his coat dark with rain steam rising from his body in the cool air. "My God," Maya whispered. "It is a horse." Tom brought the truck to a complete stop about 50 ft from the animal. The Mustang stood his ground, staring directly at them. "He's beautiful," Lily breathed, already unbuckling her seatbelt. "Lily, stay in the car," Tom warned, but his daughter was already opening her door. "He wants us to follow him," she said with absolute certainty. "Something's wrong, Lily Harrison. You get back in this car right now," Maya called. But the girl was already standing on the wet asphalt facing the wild horse, with no sign of fear. Tom quickly exited the driver's side. "Lily, that's a wild animal. It could be dangerous." The Mustang tossed his head and pawed at the ground impatiently. Then, to the astonishment of both parents, he trotted a few steps toward the guardrail, stopped and looked back at them expectantly. "See," Lily said, "he's trying to show us something." Tom approached his daughter cautiously, ready to grab her if the horse made any threatening moves, but the Mustang merely nickered softly and again moved toward the damaged section of guardrail. "Tom," Maya called from the truck, her voice tight with concern. "The guardrail's broken. There might have been an accident." Tom's expression changed immediately. As a forest ranger, he'd assisted in enough search and rescue operations to recognize the implications. He reached for his phone. "I'm calling Sheriff Daniels," he said, dialing quickly. "Stay with your mother, Lily." But Lily's attention remained fixed on the Mustang. "He knows where they are," she murmured. "He's been trying to get help." As Tom spoke urgently into his phone, the horse once again approached the guardrail and this time gave a loud, insistent whinny. "Sheriff, I'm about 12 mil out on Mountain Pass Road," Tom said. "Looks like a car might have gone over the edge. We need emergency services out here now." He paused, listening. "No, I haven't seen the vehicle yet, but the guardrail's freshly damaged." And he hesitated, looking at the Mustang, then at his daughter. "Just get here as fast as you can." After ending the call, Tom cautiously approached the broken guardrail and peered over the edge through the misting rain. He could just make out the glint of metal among the trees below. "There's definitely a car down there," he called back to Maya. "Stay with Lily. I'm going to check if anyone's hurt. Dad, take me with you." Lily pleaded. "The horse will show us the way." "Absolutely not," Tom replied firmly. "It's too dangerous." Before he could say more, the Mustang suddenly leapt over the damaged guardrail and began picking his way down the slope, stopping after a few yards to look back. "See, Dad, he knows the way. It'll be faster." Tom hesitated, torn between following proper procedure and the nagging feeling that his daughter might be right. Years of experience had taught him that in rescue situations every minute counted. "Stay right behind me," he finally said, "and if I tell you to stop or go back, you do it immediately. Understand?" Lily nodded solemnly. "Tom, you can't be serious," Maya called from the truck. "We don't have time to argue," he replied, already helping Lily over the guardrail. "There could be people dying down there. Call Sheriff Daniels again and tell him exactly where we've gone in following the Mustang's path." Tom and Lily made their way carefully down the steep slope. The wild horse moved ahead of them, but continually paused, looking back as if to ensure they were still following. "How did you know, Lily?" Tom asked as they picked their way through the wet. "Underbrush about the horse, I mean." Lily shrugged. "I just heard him calling," before Tom could question. They rounded a cluster of trees and came upon the crashed car. The sedan lay on its side, crushed and twisted, a thin wisp of smoke rising from the hood. Despite the recent rain stay back, Tom ordered, rushing forward to assess the situation. The Mustang had reached the vehicle first and now stood by the rear window, nickering softly. As Tom approached, he could hear a sound that made his blood run cold, the weak cry of an infant. "There's a baby in there," he shouted back to Lily and two adults, both unconscious. He quickly checked the adults for pulse and breathing. Both were alive, but seriously injured. The man was pinned in place and the woman hung limply against her seatbelt. But his primary concern was the infant, who lay in a detached car seat in what had been the back of the vehicle. "I need to get the baby out first," he called to Lily, who hovered anxiously nearby. The mother's breathing, but unconscious. The father's pinned in, but alive. The rear door was crushed, making it impossible. To open the window, however, was shattered, leaving an opening just large enough to reach through Lily. "I need your help," Tom said, making a split-second decision. "Your arms are smaller than mine. I need you to reach in and unbuckle the baby from the car seat so I can lift her out." Lily approached without hesitation. The Mustang stepped aside, but remained close, watching intently as Tom lifted his daughter up to the window. "Be careful of the glass," he warned as Lily reached inside. "Can you reach?" The buckle. Lily stretched her small arms toward the crying infant. "Almost got it." The buckle released with a click, and Emma's cries grew louder, as if sensing rescue was at hand. Tom carefully guided his daughter's movements as she helped maneuver the baby toward the window with infinite care. He finally lifted the infant out of the wreckage. "She's okay," he said with relief, cradling the child against his chest. "She's scared and cold, but I don't see any obvious injuries in the distance." Sirens wailed as emergency vehicles approached the scene. The Mustang's ears perked forward at the sound, but surprisingly, he didn't flee. "You did it," Lily whispered, looking at the horse with one. "You saved her." As if in response, the Mustang lowered his head to gently nuzzle the crying infant in Tom's arms. The baby's cries immediately began to soften. "I've never seen anything like it," Tom murmured, watching in amazement as the wild horse continued to comfort the child. How did he know? Why would a wild Mustang care about a human baby? Lily reached out to stroke the horse's muzzle. "He has a good heart." He heard her when nobody else could. The wail of sirens grew louder as rescue vehicles arrived at the road above. The Mustang's head lifted at the sound, ears flicking nervously. "It's okay," Lily said softly to the horse. "You don't have to stay now. You did what you needed to do for a moment." The Mustang stood still, his intelligent eyes moving from Lily to the baby and back again, then with a soft, nickering sound that almost resembled a farewell, he turned and began climbing back up the slope away from the approaching rescuers. Lily watched him go, a strange expression on her young face. "We'll see him again," she said with certainty. "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning," as paramedics and firefighters made their way down to the crash site. Tom cradled baby Emma, marveling at the series of unlikely events that had led to her rescue. "If that horse hadn't found us," he began, then shook, his head unable to complete the thought. Lily smiled, her eyes still following the Mustang as he disappeared into the trees. "Some animals just know things, Dad," she said simply. "They can hear what we can't. And sometimes, they decide to help Sheriff." Mike Daniels was the first of the rescuers to reach them, his face registering surprise at finding Tom and Lily already at the crash site with the baby Harrison. "How in the world did you get down here so fast?" he asked, taking in the scene with professional efficiency. Tom glanced toward the trees where the Mustang had vanished, then downed at the infant in his arms. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you, Mike," he said quietly. "But I think we just witnessed a miracle. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The emergency room of Elk Mountain Medical Center buzzed with activity as doctors and nurses worked to stabilize Robert and Jessica Johnson. Baby Emma, remarkably unharmed, except for minor scrapes, had been cleaned up and examined by Dr. James Bennett, who now stood in the hallway updating Sheriff Daniels on her condition. "It's nothing short of miraculous," Dr. Bennett said, shaking his head in disbelief that infant spent nearly 2 hours in a crashed vehicle during a rainstorm, and she's perfectly fine a few more hours. He left the sentence unfinished, the implication clear. Sheriff Daniels nodded solemnly, and the parents, Jessica, has a concussion and a broken arm, but she'll recover. Robert's in worse shape, internal bleeding, collapsed lung, multiple fractures. They've taken him into surgery. Dr. Bennett lowered his voice. If that baby hadn't been found when she was, we'd be dealing with 3 fatalities instead of 2 injured parents and a healthy child. The sheriff rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. That's the part I can't figure out. Tom Harrison says a wild Mustang led him to the crash site, claims the horse was actively trying to get help. A wild Mustang. Dr. Bennett raised his eyebrows. That doesn't make any sense. Wild horses avoid human contact at all costs, I know. But Tom's not one for tall tales, and his daughter backs up the story. Says she heard the horse calling, whatever that means. Inside the small waiting room, Lily sat between her parents, swinging her legs. Restlessly, she hadn't spoken much since arriving at the hospital, her eyes frequently darting to the windows as if searching for something. "The baby's going to be fine," Lily Maya said gently, misinterpreting her daughter's concern. "You helped save her life." Lily nodded absently. "I know, but I'm worried about him. The father. The doctors are doing everything they can. No, from the horse, he's alone out there, and he's scared." Tom and Meyer exchanged concerned glances over their daughter's head. This wasn't the first time Lily had showed an unusual empathy toward animals, but the intensity of her connection to this wild Mustang was something new. Lily, Tom began carefully. "That horse is a wild animal. He's lived in these mountains for years. He knows how to take care of himself, but he's never done anything like this before." Lily insisted he's confused about why he did it. "I need to find him again and make sure he's okay," before her parents could respond. Sheriff Daniels entered the waiting room. "Tom." "Mia." He nodded to them, then crouched down to Lily's level. "Lily, I need to ask you a few questions about what happened today. Is that okay?" Lily nodded solemnly. "Can you tell me exactly what you saw and heard before your dad stopped the car?" "I heard the horse calling for help," Lily said simply. "He was scared but brave. He knew the baby needed someone to find her." The sheriff glanced up at Tom and Meyer, then back to Lily. "You heard him calling?" "Like neighing, not with sounds different." Lily frowned, struggling to explain, "like when you know someone's sad even if they're smiling. I just knew what he was saying." Sheriff Daniels maintained a neutral expression. "And what happened when you and your dad followed the horse down to the car?" He showed us the way. He knew exactly where the baby was and when Dad got her out. The horse checked to make sure she was okay. Checked on her. He put his nose close to her. He was worried. The sheriff straightened up his expression. Unreadable. "Thank you, Lily. That's very helpful." He turned to Tom and Maya. "Could I speak with you both outside for a moment in the hallway?" Sheriff Daniels kept his voice low. "Look, I've known your family for years. You're sensible people. What really happened out there?" Tom ran a hand through his hair. "Exactly what Lily said. Mike, I know how it sounds, but I was there. That horse deliberately led us to the crash site. It wasn't random behavior." "Tom's right," Maya added. "I watched from the truck. The horse was standing in the road, and when Tom and Lily approached it, kept looking toward the broken guardrail, then back at them. It was communicating somehow." Sheriff Daniels' son, "I've been in law enforcement for 22 years. I've seen animals do some pretty incredible things. God, dogs protecting children, cats alerting families to fires." He shook his head. "But a wild Mustang seeking out humans to rescue a baby, that's beyond explanation." "I don't have an explanation," Tom admitted, "but I know what I saw." Conversation was interrupted as a nurse approached. "Sheriff, Mrs. Johnson is awake and asking about her baby." In Jessica Johnson's hospital room, the young mother lay pale against the white sheets, her arm in a cast, her eyes red from crying as she cradled Emma against her chest. "My husband?" she asked as the sheriff entered. "Still in surgery, ma'am. The doctors are doing everything they can." Jessica nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. They told me how Emma was found, that a wild horse LED rescuers to our car. Her voice lilted upward in disbelief. That appears to be what happened, yes, but that's impossible. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. The Harrison family was first on the scene. Their daughter seems to have some kind of connection with animals. She understood the horse was trying to get help. Jessica looked down at Emma sleeping peacefully. In her arms, Robert would say, "There's a scientific explanation," she said softly. "He always says that when something seems impossible." A small, sad smile crossed her face. "He's a wildlife photographer, or was before Emma was born. He specialized in wild horses, actually." Sheriff Daniels straightened suddenly. "Alert. Wild horses here in Elk Mountain." Jessica nodded. "He tracked the herds for years, documenting the migration patterns and behavior. He has thousands of photographs." Her breath caught on a sob. "What if he doesn't make it?" "Emma would never know. Try not to think about that right now," the sheriff said kindly. "Is there someone we can call for you, family?" Jessica shook her head. "We're new to the area. Robert's job relocated us about 6 months ago. We don't know many people." Yet back in the waiting room, Lily had fallen asleep against her mother's shoulder. The events of the day had finally caught up with her, though her sleep was restless. Her eyelids fluttering, as if in response to dreams. "She's exhausted," Maya whispered as Tom rejoined them. "We should take her home." Tom nodded gently, lifting his daughter into his arms as they walked toward the exit. Lily suddenly stirred. "He's coming back," she murmured, her eyes still closed. "Who, sweetie?" Maya asked. "The copper horse. He wants to make sure the baby's okay." Tom and Mir exchanged concerned glances over their daughter's head but said nothing as they carried her to their truck. The news of the miraculous rescue spread quickly through Elk Mountain. By morning, the story of the wild Mustang, who had led rescuers to a crashed car and saved an infant's life, had reached every household in the small community. Bill Thompson, reporter for the Elk Mountain Gaz, sat across from Sheriff Daniels in the small police station, his recorder running. "So you're confirming that a wild horse was involved in yesterday's rescue on Mountain Pass Road?" Bill asked, leaning forward eagerly. Sheriff Daniels sighed. "What I can confirm is that Tom Harrison and his daughter were led to the crash site by a Mustang displaying unusual behavior. The rest is open to interpretation. But the Harrison girl claims she could communicate with the horse." "I'm not getting into that, Bill. Lily Harrison is 8 years old. What matters is that the Johnson family was found in time, and baby Emma is safe, and the father, Robert Johnson, still in critical condition. That's all the hospital will release at this time." After the interview, Sheriff Daniels drove out to the Harrison home, a modest ranch house on the outskirts of town. Maya answered the door, looking tired but composed. "Mike, come in." "Tom's out back with Lily." Sheriff Daniels followed her through the house to the rear porch, where Tom and Lily sat side by side on the steps looking out over the meadow that stretched from their backyard to the edge of the forest. Sheriff Lily jumped up, her face brightening. "Did you come to talk about the copper horse?" "Partly," he admitted, taking a seat next to Tom. "I also wanted to let you know that Robert Johnson made it through surgery. He's still critical, but the doctors are cautiously optimistic." Tom nodded, relief evident in his expression. "That's good news. How's Jessica doing?" "Better now that she has Emma with her. She told me something interesting, though. Robert Johnson was a wildlife photographer who specialized in documenting wild horses in this region." Tom raised his eyebrows. "You think there's a connection?" "I don't know, but it's a strange coincidence, don't you think?" Lily, who had been listening intently, spoke up. "It's not a coincidence. The copper horse knew them. That's why he found their car." Both men turned to her, surprised. "What makes you say that?" Lily, Sheriff Daniels asked gently. "He told me in my dream last night." Maya, who had been standing in the doorway, stepped forward. "Lily's been having dreams about the horse since yesterday. She insisted we leave food and water at the edge of our property this morning." "And did the horse come, Sheriff?" Daniels asked. Lily shook her head. "Not yet, but he will. He's watching us right now." All three adults instinctively turned toward the meadow and the forest. Beyond, there was no sign of a horse, yet something about Lily's certainty sent a chill down Sheriff Daniels' spine. "Lily, honey," Maya said carefully, "even if the horse does come back, you know we can't keep him, right? Wild horses belong in the wild." "I know, Mom. He doesn't want to be kept. He just wants to make sure everyone's okay." And she hesitated. "He wants to show me something important." Tom frowned. Show you what, Lily? I don't know yet, but it's about the baby and her dad. There's something we're supposed to understand later. That afternoon, Dr. Sarah Reynolds, the local veterinarian, arrived. At the Harrison home, Tom had called her earlier, hoping she might provide some insights into the Mustang's behavior. I've worked with horses all my life, Dr. Reynolds said, as they sat around the kitchen table. And while they're incredibly intelligent, animals with complex emotional lives. What you're describing is highly unusual. Wild Mustangs are naturally wary of humans, especially in regions where they've been rounded up or culled in the past. This one seemed different. Tom explained the way. It looked at us, it wasn't afraid exactly. It was almost like it was asking for help. Lily finished. He knew he couldn't get the baby out by himself, so he had to find people. Dr. Reynolds regarded Lily thoughtfully. You seem to understand this horse. Very well, Lily. The girl shrugged. It's easy. He thinks clearer than other animals you've encountered. Lily nodded. Most animals think in pictures and feelings. The copper horse thinks more like people do. It's easier to understand. Lily has always had a way with animals. Mira explained we used to call it her special talent, but this connection with the Mustang feels different, more intense. Dr. Reynolds leaned forward. Lily, if this horse comes back, would you let me see him from a distance? Of course, I wouldn't interfere. He'll come tonight, Lily said confidently after dark when it's quiet as the adults continued to talk. Lily slipped outside to check the water and food she had left at the edge of the property. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the meadow. She stood quietly watching the tree line. I know you're there, she whispered. It's okay to come out when you're ready. I understand you're confused. I am too, but we'll figure it out together. A soft rustling from the trees made her heart leap, but it was just a deer moving cautiously into the open to graze in the evening light. Lily sighed and turned back toward the house, unaware of the pair of intelligent eyes watching her from deeper within the forest that night. As the Harrison household slept, a figure moved silently across the moonlit meadow. The UY Mustang approached the water bucket Lily had left out, drinking deeply, before raising his head to stare at the darkened house. For a long moment, he stood motionless as if making a decision inside. Lily suddenly sat up in bed, fully awake, without hesitation. She slipped from beneath her covers and moved to the window. There, illuminated by moonlight, stood the copper horse. Their eyes met across the distance, and a smile spread across Lily's face. I knew you'd come, she whispered against the glass. The Mustang tossed his head, pouring at the ground once before turning to look back toward the forest, then again at Lily without waking her parents. Lily quietly dressed and slipped out the back door onto the porch. The night air was cool against her skin as she cautiously descended the steps and walked toward the waiting horse. Hello again, she said softly. As she approached, I'm Lily. The Mustang remained still, watching her with those intelligent eyes. As Lily drew closer, he lowered, his head slightly, nostrils flaring as he took in her scent. The baby is okay, she told him, stopping a few feet away. Her name is Emma. Her mom is getting better too. Her dad is still sick, but the doctors think he'll live. The horse nickered softly, as if in response. Why did you help them? Lily asked. Most wild horses stay away from people. The Mustang poured at the ground again, then turned his head to look toward the distant mountains. You want me to follow you? Lily realized aloud. There's something. You want to show me? The horse took a few steps toward the forest, then stopped and looked back at her expectantly. Lily has hesitated, glancing back at the dark house. She knew she shouldn't leave without telling her parents, but something told her this couldn't wait until morning. The Mustang had come specifically for her, and whatever he needed to show her was important. I'll come, she decided, but not too far. Okay, I need to be back before anyone wakes up. As if understanding, the Mustang waited patiently as Lily approached. When she was close enough to touch him, he stood perfectly still, allowing her to gently place her hand on his warm neck. A thrill ran through Lily at the contact. This wasn't like petting the tame horses at the local stables. This was a wild creature, free and untamed, choosing to trust her lead the way. She whispered, I'm ready. The forest at night was a tapestry of shadows and silver moonlight. Lily followed the Mustang along what appeared to be a game trail, narrow but well worn. The horse moved slowly, frequently looking back to ensure she was still following. Despite the darkness, Lily felt no fear, only a growing sense of anticipation. They traveled for what seemed like a long time. Though Lily suspected, it was less than an hour. The trail began to slope upward and the trees thinned as they climbed. Finally, they reached a small clearing near the edge of a cliff. The Mustang stopped, turning to face Lily as if to say, "We're here." The view from the cliff top was breathtaking. Moonlight silvered the valley below, and in the distance the lights of Elk Mountain twinkled like earthbound stars. But it wasn't the view that held Lily's attention. At the far edge of the clearing stood a crude stone marker, weathered by years of exposure to the elements. Elle approached it cautiously. The Mustang followed, standing close beside her. As she knelt to examine the marker, it was clearly man-made, a pile of flat stones carefully balanced to form a small monument. At its base lay the remains of what might once have been a wreath of dried flowers, now little more than dust. "What is this place?" Lily whispered, running her fingers over the stones. "Why did you bring me here?" The horse nickered, softly nudging her shoulder with his muzzle. Then he poured at the ground near the marker, exposing something partly buried in the soil. Lily reached down and carefully extracted the object, a tarnished metal tag attached to a frayed leather cord, brushing off the dirt. Lily held the tag up to catch the moonlight. Engraved on its surface was a single word: Spirit. Spirit. She read aloud, looking up at the Mustang. "Is that your name?" The horse tossed his head, pawing the ground again. "No," Lily realized, "not you." "Someone else?" Her eyes widened as understanding dawned. There was another horse here, one that someone cared about. The Mustang, not Spirit, moved to the cliff edge, gazing out over the valley. Lily joined him, the tag still clutched in her hand. "This place was special to someone," she murmured. "They lost a horse named Spirit, and they made this marker to remember." As if in response, the Mustang began to make his way down a narrow path that descended from the cliff. Lily hesitated only briefly before following. The path was steep, but navigable, winding down through rocky outcroppings, until it opened onto another, larger clearing. Here, sheltered by the cliff above, stood the remains of what had once been in a small cabin. The roof had long since collapsed, and nature had begun to reclaim the structure. Wildflowers grew through the rotted floorboards, and a young aspen sapling pushed up through what had once been the doorway. Lily approached the ruins cautiously. Someone lived here. The Mustang moved to what appeared to have been the cabin's front porch and poured at a spot near the steps. Lily knelt beside him and began to clear away the debris. Her fingers soon touched something solid, a metal box about the size of a thick book, partially buried in the soil. The box was rusted but intact, its hinges creaking in protest as Lily carefully opened it. Inside, protected from the elements, lay a collection of photographs in a small leather-bound journal. Lily lifted out one of the photos, holding it up to catch the moonlight filtering through the trees. The image showed a younger man, perhaps in his early 20s, standing beside a copper-colored foe. The man's face was partially visible, his attention focused on the young horse beside him. Lily gasped, looking up at the Mustang, who watched her intently. "Is this you?" she whispered, comparing the fold in the photograph to the adult horse before her. The Mustang nickered softly, stepping closer to examine the photo himself. "Lily Care." I returned the photograph to the box and picked up the journal. The leather was cracked with age, but the pages inside remained legible. She opened to the first entry, dated 15 years earlier. "Found an orphaned FO today near Spirit's grave. Mother likely taken in the BLM roundup last week. He's barely a month old, copper-colored like his mother was. Something about those intelligent eyes reminds me of Spirit. I can't leave him to die out here. I'm calling him Copper." Lily looked up at the Mustang, at Copper, with growing excitement. "Someone rescued you when you were a baby. They took care of you here." She continued reading, skimming through entries that documented Copper's growth from a fragile orphan to a strong young horse. The journal's author had clearly intended to rehabilitate the FO and eventually release him back to the wild, but as the months passed, a deep bond had formed between them. Lily paused at an entry dated nearly a year after the first Copper's first birthday today. "He's growing into a magnificent young horse, intelligent, beyond any animal I've encountered. Sometimes I swear he understands every word I say." He follows me everywhere, curious about my photography equipment, playful one moment and solemnly attentive the next. I know I should be preparing him for release, but I can't imagine these mountains without him nearby. The next several entries detailed Copper's training not to be ridden, but to live safely in the wild while maintaining a connection with humans. The author had taught the young horse to avoid roads, stay clear of hunters, and recognize safe water. Sources of photographs slipped from between the pages. The same man, now clearly recognizable, despite his younger appearance, standing beside the adolescent Copper against the backdrop of the cliff face. Lily stared at the image, recognition dawning. Slowly, "This is Emma's dad," she gasped. Robert Johnson. The pieces began falling into place in Lily's mind. Robert Johnson, wildlife photographer, specializing in wild horses, had rescued an orphaned FO and raised him in secret, preparing him for eventual return to the wild. But something had happened, something that had separated them. Lily flipped forward through the journal, scanning for clues. The entries abruptly changed in tone. About 2 years after the first one received notice today, the land has been sold to developers. Construction begins in spring. They're planning a luxury wilderness retreat, whatever that means, all this. The writing became agitated, the pen pressing deeply into the paper. All this wild beauty carved up and commodified. And what of the horses? What of Copper? Where will they go when the bulldozers come? The next few entries detailed the author's frantic efforts to find a way to protect the land and the wild horses that called it home. Petitions, town meetings, appeals to conservation organizations, all unsuccessful. The final entry was brief and heartbreaking. "I have to leave. The new owners have made it clear that squatters will be prosecuted. Copper refuses to go beyond the boundaries of this valley. It's the only home he's ever known. I've tried everything to coax him further, but he always returns better. He remains. Wild, then be captured and broken. I have to trust that he'll find a way to survive. Forgive me. Old friend, I never meant to abandon you." Lily closed the journal. Tears welling in her eyes, she looked up at Copper, who stood watching her with those intelligent, knowing eyes. "You weren't just randomly passing by when you found the car crash," she whispered. "You recognized Robert, didn't you, after all these years? You knew him." Copper lowered his head gently, nuzzling the box of memories Lily carefully repacked, the journal and photographs closing the rusted lid. "We need to show this to Robert," she said decisively. "He needs to know you're still here, that you survived, and that you saved his baby." The eastern sky was beginning to lighten as Lily and Copper made their way back through the forest. Lily clutched the metal box tightly, her mind racing with all she had discovered. Copper led her confidently through the trees, occasionally stopping to ensure she was still following as they neared the edge of the Harrison property. The first golden rays of dawn were spreading across the meadow. Lily suddenly realized how long she had been gone. Her parents would be waking soon if they hadn't already, and would be frantic to find her bed empty. "I need to hurry," she told Copper. "Will you come with me to my house?" The Mustang hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of approaching the building so openly. "It's okay," Lily assured him. "My parents will understand once I show them what I found, and we need to get this to Robert and Jessica." Copper still seemed uncertain, but when Lily began walking toward the house, he followed at a cautious distance as they crossed the open meadow. The back door of the Harrison home suddenly flew open. Tom burst out onto the porch, his face tight with worry. "Lily," he shouted, relief and anger mingling in his voice, "where on earth have you been?" Maya appeared behind him, her hand flying to her mouth when she saw her daughter crossing the meadow, the wild Mustang following several yards behind. "I'm sorry, Dad," Lily called, quickening her pace, "but this is important. I know why the horse saved Emma." Tom rushed down the steps to meet his daughter, his relief at finding her safe temporarily overriding his anger at her disappearance. "Do you have any idea how worried we've been? We were about to call Sheriff Daniels. I know, I'm sorry," Lily repeated. "But look," she held up the metal box. "The horse. His name is Copper. He took me to a place in the mountains. This belonged to Robert Johnson. He rescued Copper when he was a baby and raised him. They knew each other." Tom took the box from his daughter, confusion evident on his face. "What are you talking about? You've been gone all night because a horse took..." You to the mountains, it's all in here. Lily insisted, tapping the box photographs and a journal. Robert Johnson lived in a cabin in the mountains years ago. He found Copper as an orphaned foe and raised him until he had to leave. That's why Copper recognized the car and tried to get help. He recognized Robert Mia had joined them, wrapping a protective arm around Lily's shoulders. Sweetie, that's quite a story. It's not a story, Mom. It's true. Look inside the box. Tom hesitated, then carefully opened the rusted container. He lifted out one of the photographs, studying it in the early morning light. His expression slowly changed from skepticism to amazement. That's definitely Robert Johnson. He confirmed, showing the photo to Maya, much younger. But it's him, and that's Copper, Lily said, pointing to the FO in the image, then to the Mustang who stood watching them from the edge of the meadow. He's the same horse, all grown up. Tom pulled out the journal quickly, skimming several entries. This is incredible, he murmured. If this is authentic, it means Robert Johnson had a deep connection with that Mustang years ago. It explains why the horse went to such lengths to get help after the crash. Maya said, the skepticism fading from her voice. He wasn't just randomly passing by. He was trying to save someone he recognized, someone who once saved him. We have to show this to Jessica, Lily insisted, and to Robert when he wakes up. They need to know. Tom nodded slowly, looking from the journal to the copper-colored Mustang standing alert at the meadow's edge. You're right, this changes everything. He knelt to Lily's level, his expression serious. But Lily, you can never disappear like that again. Again. Do you understand? Your mother and I were terrified. Lily nodded, properly chastened. I'm sorry, Dad, but Copper needed me to understand. It was the only way he could tell his story as the family talked. None of them noticed the black SUV that had pulled up at the front of the house, or the man who now stood watching them from around the corner of the building, his expression calculating as he observed the wild Mustang at the edge of the property. Marcus Wood's lead developer for Elk Mountain Estates had come to discuss a potential land purchase with the Harrisons. Instead, he had stumbled upon something far more interesting, the miracle horse. The entire town was talking about the one that had supposedly led rescuers to a crashed car. As he watched the magnificent animal standing proudly in the morning light, an idea began to form in his mind. Such a horse would be the perfect mascot for his new luxury development, a living symbol of the wild spirit. His marketing team was trying to capture with the right approach. This could be transformed from a potential PR problem into a golden opportunity. Silently, Woods retreated to his vehicle, pulling out his phone to make a call. The wild Mustang would soon face a threat far more immediate than the gradual encroachment of development. A threat that would put Lily's newfound bond with Copper to the ultimate test. The hospital corridor was quiet as Tom, Mir, and Lily made their way to Robert Johnson's room. Sheriff Daniels had arranged the visit after hearing about the discovery of the metal box and its contents. He walked alongside them now, his expression thoughtful. Jessica's in with him now, the sheriff explained in a low voice. His condition has stabilized, but he's still weak. Try not to overwhelm him. Lily clutched the metal box tightly, her eyes darting occasionally to the windows as if checking for something. Or someone outside. Is Copper still at our place? Tom asked his daughter, noticing her distraction. Lily nodded. He's staying near the tree line. He's nervous about being too close to the house, but he won't leave. I still can't believe any of this, Maya murmured. If I hadn't seen the photographs and journal myself. They paused outside Robert's room as Sheriff Daniels knocked gently on the door. Jessica's voice called for them to enter inside. The young mother sat beside her husband's bed, baby Emma sleeping peacefully in a small portable crib nearby. Robert Johnson looked pale against the white hospital sheets, various tubes and monitors connecting him to medical equipment, but his eyes were open and alert. Robert, Jessica, Sheriff Daniels began. This is Tom Harrison and his family. They were first on the scene at your accident, the ones who found us. Jessica said, standing to shake hands with Tom and Meyer. The doctors told us what happened, how you followed a wild horse to our car. Her voice held a note of lingering disbelief. We can never thank you enough. Robert's gaze moved past the adults to Lily, who stood slightly behind her parents, still holding the metal box. You must be Lily, he said, his voice weak but warm. Jessica told me you were the one who heard the horse calling for help. Lily stepped forward. His name is Copper. she said directly. And he knows you. A puzzled expression crossed Robert's face. Knows me. Lily placed the metal box on the bed beside him. He took me to your old cabin last night in the mountains. I found this. Robert stared at the rusted box, his face draining of what little color it had with trembling hands. He reached for it, running his fingers over the lid as if unable to believe what he was seeing. My journal, he whispered, my photographs. How did you? Copper showed me. Lily explained simply. He wanted me to understand why he helped you. Robert opened the box with shaking hands, lifting out the top photograph, the image of himself as a young man. Standing beside the copper-colored foe, Jessica moved closer, peering over his shoulder. Robert, what is this? Who's that with you? A lifetime ago. Robert murmured, his eyes filled with wonder. Before development pushed into the mountains, before everything changed, he looked up at Lily. You're saying the Mustang that found our car was Copper? Lily confirmed. The foe you rescued, he recognized you. After all these years, Robert leaned back against his pillows, overwhelmed. I can't believe he survived, he said. Softly, when I had to leave, I tried to get him to follow me beyond the mountains, but he wouldn't go. This valley was the only home he never known. Jessica picked up the journal, opening it to the first page. You never told me about this, she said, a hint of hurt in her voice. It was too painful. Robert admitted, I thought I'd failed him, left him to die or be captured when the developers moved in. He turned to Sheriff Daniels. What happened with the Elk Mountain Estates project, the luxury resort? They were planning. The economy tanked before constru production really got going. Sheriff Daniels explained the company went bankrupt, and the land remained undeveloped, but there's a new push. Now different companies, similar plans. Marcus Woods has been buying up parcels all around the mountain. Robert's expression darkened. The same threat, just delayed. A few years. He looked at Lily intently. Where is Copper now? At our house. Lily answered. He's staying in the woods at the edge of our property. He's waiting. Waiting for what? For you to get better. I think he wants to make sure you're okay. Robert's eyes filled with tears. After all this time, he whispered, after I abandoned him. You didn't abandon him, Jessica said firmly, squeezing her husband's hand. You did what you had to do. A soft sound from the portable crib drew everyone's attention. Baby, Emma was awake, her tiny hands reaching upward. Jessica lifted her daughter, cradling her close. She wouldn't be here if not for Copper, she said quietly. None of us would. Robert nodded, his gaze returning to the photograph in his hands. I need to see him, he said with sudden determination. As soon as the doctors clear me to leave, I need to see Copper again before anyone could respond. The door opened and a nurse entered to check Robert's vital signs. I'm sorry, she said, noticing the crowd, but Mr. Johnson needs his rest now. Doctor's orders. As they prepared to leave, Robert caught Lily's hand. Thank you, he said earnestly, for believing what Copper was trying to tell you. Not many would have understood. Lily smiled. That's what my parents always say, that I understand animals better than most people do outside the hospital. Sheriff Daniels accompanied the Harrison family to their truck. I'd like to see this Mustang myself, he said, if what you found is authentic, and it certainly appears to be, we might have legal grounds to challenge the new development plans for that area. How so? Tom asked. If we can prove that the land contains historically significant sites related to wild horse conservation efforts, it could trigger a review under the National Historic Preservation Act. Robert's abandoned cabin and his documentation of working with wild horses might qualify. Marcus Woods won't give up easily, Tom warned. He's invested millions already. No, he won't. Sheriff Daniels agreed grimly, which is why we need to move carefully. Keep this quiet for now until we can build a solid case. Little did they know that it was already too late for secrecy. At that very moment, Marcus Woods was in his sleek downtown office viewing photographs, sent to him by a private investigator, images of a copper-colored Mustang at the edge of the Harrison property. Magnificent animal, said George Davis, a town councilman and early investor in the Elk Mountain Estates project. But what does this have to do with our development plans? Everything, Woods replied, sliding another document across the desk. The public relations value alone would be worth millions. The miracle horse of Elk Mountain, exclusive to our resort, Councilman Davis, studied the paper a detailed plan for capturing the Mustang and creating a special enclosure for him as a centerpiece of the resort property. The locals won't like it. Davis cautioned they're already treating this horse like some kind of sacred being, which is exactly why we need to control the narrative. Woods insisted we don't capture him. We rescue him, provide him with protection. Veterinary care premium feed. We turn him into the mascot of Elk Mountain Estates, living proof of our commitment to preserving the heritage of the region, and if he resists capture. Woods waved a dismissive hand. He's just a horse, wild or not. They all respond to the same basic techniques. I've already contacted a specialist back at the Harrison property. Lily sat cross-legged in the meadow watching as Copper grazed cautiously at the edge of the tree line. She'd spent most of the afternoon talking softly to him, gradually coaxing him to trust her more fully now. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, she sensed a growing restlessness in the Mustang. You don't have to stay, she told him. I know you have your own places to be, but will you come back tomorrow? Robert wants to see you when he's well enough to leave the hospital. Copper lifted his head, ears pricked forward as he stared past Lily toward the gravel road that led to the Harrison home. Moments later, Lily heard what the horse had already detected, the sound of an approaching vehicle. An unfamiliar black SUV pulled into the driveway. Lily stood up instantly. Wary Copper backed several steps toward the forest, clearly uncomfortable with the new arrival. Marcus Woods emerged from the vehicle, his expensive suit looking out of place against the rural backdrop he approached with, a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Hello there, he called to Lily. You must be the famous Lily Harrison. The whole town's talking about you and your miraculous horse. He's not my horse, Lily replied cautiously. He's wild. He just visits. Wood's gaze moved to Copper, who stood alert at the forest edge. Magnificent animal, he said, an unmistakable note of acquisitiveness in his voice. I'd love to get a closer look at him. He doesn't like strangers, Lily said flatly. What do you want? If Woods was taken aback by the child's directness, he didn't show it. I was hoping to speak with your parents. Actually, is either of them home? My mom's inside. Lily made no move to fetch her, continuing to regard the visitor with open suspicion. I see. Woods took another step toward the meadow, his eyes still fixed on Copper. You know, I've been thinking about what a special horse like that needs protection, proper care, a safe place where people could appreciate him. He already. As that Lily interrupted, the mountains are his home. But for how long? Woods's tone was sympathetic, but his eyes remained calculating. Development is coming to Elk Mountain. Whether people like it or not, the wild spaces are shrinking every year. Wouldn't it be better for him to have a guaranteed safe haven? Before Lily could respond, the back door opened and Maya stepped onto the porch. Lily, who are you talking to? Her eyes narrowed as she recognized the visitor. Mr. Woods, what brings you to our property? Woods turned on the charm, approaching the house with his hand extended. Mrs. Harrison, I was just admiring the famous Mustang. Your daughter has befriended quite remarkable. He's not a pet, Mir said firmly, shaking his hand briefly. He's a wild animal that happens to visit our property, of course. Of course, actually, that's partly why I'm here. My company has been developing plans for a wild horse sanctuary as part of our Elk Mountain Estates project, a protected area where Mustangs like this one could live safely with proper veterinary care and nutrition, while also allowing the public to appreciate these magnificent creatures. Maya's expression remained skeptical. That's not what we've heard about your development plans. The last presentation to the town council mentioned nothing about a horse sanctuary. It's a new initiative, Woods explained, smoothly inspired. Partly by recent events, the story of this particular horse has generated considerable interest in wild horse preservation. While the adults talked, Lily kept her attention on Copper, who had begun moving deeper into the forest, clearly disturbed. By Woods' presence, she understood the Mustang's unease. Something about the developer felt wrong. His interest in Copper predatory rather than protective. We'd like to offer your family the opportunity to be involved, Woods continued. Given your daughter's special connection with the animal, perhaps as consultants on the sanctuary project. That's very interesting, Maya replied carefully. But I think we'd need to discuss this as a family and with others who have expertise in wild horse conservation. Of course, take your time, Woods said magnanimously. Though I should mention the sanctuary planning is moving forward quickly. We've already secured the necessary permits for the first phase of development, which will include the area where your Mustang friend has been spotted most frequently. Lily, who had been listening while watching Copper retreat, suddenly turned toward the adults. "You can't build there," she said firmly. "That's Copper's home. It's where Robert's cabin is." Woods raised an eyebrow. Robert Johnson?" His surprise appeared genuine. "What does he have to do with this?" Maya placed a protective hand on Lily's shoulder. "I think that's a conversation for another time, Mr. Woods. If you'll excuse us, we will about to have dinner." Woods nodded pleasantly, though his eyes had hardened. "Of course, I'll leave my card to think about my offer. It could be very beneficial for everyone involved, especially the horse." As he walked back to his SUV, Lily whispered urgently to her mother, "He wants to capture Copper. I can tell he doesn't care about protecting him." "I know, sweetheart," Maya replied quietly. "Don't worry, we won't let that happen." But as Woods drove away, Lily wasn't so sure. She looked toward the forest where Copper had disappeared, a knot of fear forming in her stomach. Something told her that the danger to the Mustang had just become much more immediate than any of them realized later that evening. As darkness fell over Elk Mountain, a small group gathered in the Harrison living room. Tom and Maya, Sheriff Daniels, Dr. Sarah Reynolds, and Helen Parker, the town librarian and local historian who had been brought in for her knowledge of the area's past. Marcus Woods isn't just interested in developing luxury homes anymore, Tom explained, pacing the floor. Now he's talking about a wild horse sanctuary. He came here specifically to ask about Copper. That can't be a coincidence. Sheriff Daniels mused. Not right after the story of the rescue hit the news, and certainly not right after you discovered Robert Johnson's connection to the horse. Dr. Reynolds leaned forward. Her expression concerned. A sanctuary. Sounds benevolent, but I don't trust Woods' motivation. Wild horses can't simply be relocated on a whim. They have deep connections to their home ranges, especially Copper. Lily added from her perch on the couch. Robert's journal says he never would leave the valley, even when Robert tried to leave him away. Helen Parker, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. "There's more to this story than you all realize," she said, her voice carrying the weight of long knowledge. "The land where Robert built his cabin, where Copper was raised, it isn't just any piece of the mountain." All eyes turned to the elderly librarian as she continued. "That area has been a sanctuary for wild horses for generations. The locals called it Spirit Valley long before any development was planned there." "Spirit," Lily said suddenly. "Like the name on the marker I found near Robert's cabin." Helen nodded. Spirit was a legendary Mustang stallion who led a herd in those mountains. For nearly 20 years he was known for his unusual copper coloring, a trait that sometimes appears in his descendants like Copper. Lily breathed. Possibly Helen acknowledged. "The interesting thing is, what happened after Spirit died? The valley became a sacred place of sorts. The local ranchers, who otherwise might have seen wild horses as competitors for grazing land, agreed to leave that area undisturbed. It became an unwritten rule Spirit Valley was for the Mustangs. But then the land was sold for development." Sheriff Daniels concluded. "Yes, about 15 years ago. Many locals protested, but the legal rights were clear. The new owners could do what they wanted." She looked at Lily. Around that time, a young wildlife photographer took a particular interest in documenting the wild horses of Spirit Valley. "That was Robert Johnson." "Do you think Robert knew all this history?" Maya asked. "I believe so. He spent months researching in my library before he moved up to that cabin. He was particularly interested in the legends surrounding Spirit and his herd." Tom stopped pacing, a thoughtful expression on his face. "If we could document this cultural history combined with Robert's journal and photographs, we might have a case for historical preservation of the area." "It won't be easy," Sheriff Daniels cautioned. "Woods has a lot of money and influence behind this project. But we have something he doesn't," Lily said confidently. "We have the truth, and we have Copper." As the adults continued their discussion, Lily slipped outside onto the back porch. The night was clear, stars blazing above the dark silhouettes of the mountains. Somewhere out there, Copper was watching, waiting, and now Lily realized he was in danger. "I'll protect you," she whispered to the night. "I promise." Dawn broke over Elk Mountain in a wash of pink and gold. Lily had barely slept, her mind filled with worry for Copper and plans for his protection. She dressed quickly and hurried downstairs, surprised to find her father already At the kitchen table, papers spread before him, a mug of coffee cooling at his elbow. "Dad, what are you doing up so early?" Tom looked up, dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he hadn't slept much either, looking over these maps of the mountain. "Helen left them last night. I'm trying to understand exactly which areas Woods has permits for already, and which might still be protected if we can prove their historical significance." Lily peered over his shoulder at the maps. One showed current property boundaries with large sections highlighted in red, presumably the areas already acquired by Woods Company. Another showed an older demarcation of the region with Spirit Valley clearly marked. "That's where Copper took me," Lily said, pointing to the valley on the old map where Robert's cabin is. Tom nodded grimly, and according to this newer map, that's exactly where Woods plans to build the centerpiece of his resort, the Wild Horse Sanctuary. He mentioned. Lily's stomach dropped. He's going to try to capture Copper today, isn't he? Tom looked at his daughter with surprise. "What makes you say that?" The way he was looking at him yesterday, like Copper was already his. She grabbed her father's arm urgently. "We need to warn him. We need to get him somewhere safe, Lily. We can't just, Dad, please. Woods won't wait for legal processes or town meetings. He wants Copper now before anyone can stop him." Tom studied his daughter's face, recognizing the depth of her conviction. After a moment, he nodded. "I'll call Sheriff Daniels and Dr. Reynolds. They should know what's happening. I'm going to find Copper," Lily said, already heading for the door. "Lily, wait. You can't go alone, Al." But she was already out the door and racing across the dewy meadow toward the tree line where she had last seen the Mustang. The morning air was crisp against her face as she called out, "Copper. Copper. Where are you?" There was no response, no flash of Copper coat among the trees. Lily slowed, catching her breath as she reached the forest edge. "Copper," she called again, more softly now. "Please come. You are in danger." A rustle of leaves to her left made her turn. There, partially hidden among the trees, stood the Mustang. He seemed agitated, his ears flicking back and forth, nostrils flaring as he tested the air. "You sense it too, don't you?" Lily said, approaching slowly. "Something's wrong." Copper pawed the ground nervously but didn't retreat as Lily came closer. When she was within arm's reach, she stopped, allowing the horse to make the final decision about their proximity. After a moment's hesitation, Copper stepped forward, lowering his head to gently butt against her shoulder, a gesture of trust that brought tears to Lily's eyes. "The man who came yesterday. Marcus Woods," she explained, as if the horse could understand every word. "He wants to capture you, put you in a fake sanctuary as an attraction for his resort." Copper's ears flicked at the urgency in her voice. "We need to get you somewhere safe until Robert is well enough to help. He's getting better. He wants to see you." The sound of a vehicle on the gravel road made both Lily and Copper tense. She glimpsed her father's truck approaching the house, Sheriff Daniels' patrol car right behind it. Lily felt a moment of relief. Help had arrived. But then, from the opposite direction came another sound, the rumble of multiple engines approaching from the Forest Service road that cut through the back of the property. Copper heard it too, his head rising sharply, body tensing for flight. "No," Lily whispered suddenly, understanding they're coming. From both directions in that moment, a plan formed in her mind, desperate and risky. But the only option she could see. "Copper," she said urgently, placing her hand on the Mustang's strong neck. "Can you take me to Spirit Valley, to Robert's cabin now?" The horse seemed to understand the urgency. He lowered himself slightly, an invitation Lily immediately accepted. Scrambling onto his bare back, she had ridden tame horses at the local stables, but never bareback, and never a wild Mustang yet. Somehow, it felt right, as if they had done this 100 times before. "Go," she whispered, leaning forward to grab handfuls of his man. Quickly, Copper needed no further urging. He sprang forward into the forest, moving with surprising gentleness despite his speed, as if conscious of his young rider's safety. Lily clung to his back, the wind rushing past her face as they wove through the trees, heading deeper into the wilderness, away from the approaching vehicles. Back at the Harrison house, Tom was frantically explaining the situation to Sheriff Daniels and Dr. Reynolds, who had arrived in response to his urge calls. "Lily's convinced Woods is planning to capture the Mustang today," he told them, his voice tight with worry. "She ran out to warn him, and now I Can't find her. Woods did file for a special permit yesterday. Sheriff Daniels confirmed, grimly, claiming the horse is a danger to public safety due to its unusual behavior approaching roads and people. He's twisted the rescue story to suggest the animal is unstable and needs to be contained. That's ridiculous, Dr. Reynolds protested. From everything I've heard, this Mustang has shown remarkable intelligence and discretion, approaching humans only when necessary to save lives. Woods doesn't care about facts, Sheriff Daniels replied. He cares about getting what he wants, and right now, he was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching from the back of the property. Through the kitchen window, they could see three large trucks, bearing the Elk Mountain Estates logo, making their way along the Forest Service road. They're here, Tom said, his face paling, and Lily's out there somewhere. Maya burst into the kitchen, having heard the commotion. What's happening? Where's Lily? Before anyone could answer, the doorbell rang. Sheriff Daniels moved to answer it, his hand resting instinctively on his sidearm. Marcus Woods stood on the porch, flanked by two men in uniform bearing the Elk Mountain Estates logo behind them. A livestock trailer was being backed into position at the edge of the property. Sheriff Daniels, Woods said smoothly, though surprise flickered briefly in his eyes. I wasn't expecting to see you here this morning, Mr. Woods, the sheriff replied, coolly. Care to explain what you're doing on the Harrison property with what appears to be a capture team? Woods produced an official-looking document from his jacket pocket. Everything's in order, Sheriff. I have a permit for the relocation of a potentially dangerous wild animal that's been frequenting this property for the public good. Of course, Sheriff Daniels took the paper, examining it carefully. This was processed awfully quickly. I have friends on the Wildlife Commission, Woods said with a thin smile. They understand the urgency of the situation. Dr. Reynolds joined at the door as a veterinarian specializing in large animals. I can testify that this Mustang presents no danger to the public. In fact, he's demonstrated exceptional intelligence and positive interaction with humans. With all due respect, Doctor, the permit has been issued. We're here to safely relocate the animal to a proper facility where it can receive appropriate care while still being appreciated by the public. You mean your resort's petting zoo? Tom said coldly, coming to stand beside the sheriff. Wood's smile tightened. I prefer to call it a wildlife education center now. If you'll excuse us, we have a job to do. The horse isn't here, Maya said, stepping forward, and neither is our daughter. For the first time, Woods looked genuinely taken aback. What do you mean Lily's gone? Tom explained, worry evident in his voice. She was concerned about the Mustang's safety and went to look for him earlier this morning. Neither of them is on our property now. Woods's expression darkened. Your daughter is interfering with a legal wildlife management operation that could have serious consequences. Are you threatening a child, Sheriff? Daniels asked quietly, his hand still resting on his weapon. Of course not, Woods. Backby settled quickly. I'm merely concerned for her safety. A young girl, alone with a wild horse, could be in danger. The only danger to either of them is you and your capture team, Dr. Reynolds stated firmly. Woods ignored her, turning to his men spread out and searched the surrounding forest. The horse can't have gone far. He looked back at the group on the porch. This is happening whether you cooperate or not. The only question is how difficult you want to make it for yourselves. Woods and his men moved away to organize their search. Sheriff Daniels turned to Tom and Mir. I need to call for backup and verify this permit. It looks official, but there are procedures that should have been followed. Public notices, comment periods. What about Lily? Maya asked, her voice tight with fear. I'll organize a search party, Tom decided, already pulling out his phone. I know these mountains. If Lily with the Mustang, I have an idea where they might be headed miles away. Lily and Copper were making their way through the rugged mountain terrain, following paths that no human trail-crossed. Copper moved with the shooted confidence of an animal in its natural environment, carefully picking routes that his rider could safely navigate. They had been traveling for over an hour when Copper suddenly stopped, ears pricked forward. Alertly, Lily, who had been lost in thoughts of how to protect her equine friend, quickly focused on their surroundings. What is it? She whispered, leaning forward against his neck. The answer came in the distant sound of engines still far away, but unmistakable in the quiet of the wilderness woods. Men were pursuing them using the old logging roads that crisscrossed the lower mountain slopes. We need to hurry, Lily urged, though she knew Copper already understood the danger. The Mustang resumed Their journey, moving even more swiftly now, following a steep path that no vehicle could navigate as they climbed higher. The forest began to thin, offering glimpses of the valley spread out below. Lily could see tiny vehicles moving along the roads, converging on the mountain from multiple directions. Woods had mobilized a significant force to capture one wild horse, proof of how valuable he considered copper to be. Finally, they crested a ridge and descended into the protected bowl of Spirit Valley. The clearing where Robert's cabin stood appeared much as it had when Lily had first seen it. Peaceful, isolated, a place forgotten by time. Copper slowed as they approached, allowing Lily to slip carefully from his back. "We should be safe here." For a while, she told him, stretching her stiff legs. "They'll have to come on foot from here, and that will take time." Copper nickered softly, moving toward the ruins of the cabin as if drawn by memories. Lily followed her eyes, scanning the surrounding forest for any sign of pursuit. The mountain stillness was broken only by birdsong and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze inside what remained of the cabin. Lily found a relatively intact corner where she could rest. The morning's adventure had left her tired and hungry, but her determination remained strong. She had bought them time, but what next? She couldn't hide Copper in the mountains forever. Robert would know what to do, she said aloud, drawing comfort from the sound of her own voice in the quiet ruins. "He raised you here. He protected you once before." Copper, who had been investigating the perimeter of the clearing, suddenly raised his head, ears forward, nostrils flaring. But unlike his earlier alarm, his posture now suggested recognition rather than fear. Moments later, Lily heard what the Mustang had already detected: someone approaching on foot, moving carefully through the underbrush. She tensed, looking around for somewhere to hide. But Copper's relaxed stance made her hesitate. "Lily," a familiar voice called out. "Lily, are you here, Dad?" She rushed from the cabin ruins to find her father emerging from the trees, breathless from the climb, but immensely relieved to see her safe. "Thank God," Tom said, enfolding his daughter in a tight embrace. "Do you have any idea how worried we've been?" "I had to warn Copper," Lily explained, pulling back to look up at her father earnestly. "Woods brought trucks and a trailer to capture him. They were coming from both directions." Tom nodded grimly. "I know Sheriff Daniels is checking into the legality of Woods' permit, but in the meantime, we need to get you home safely." "What about Copper? We can't leave him. Woods' men are searching the whole mountain." "We won't leave him," Tom assured her, glancing at the Mustang, who watched them cautiously from near the cabin ruins. "But we need a better plan than hiding in the wilderness." A rustle in the underbrush made them both turn sharply. Copper tense, ready to flee if necessary, but instead of Woods or his men, it was Dr. Sarah Reynolds who stepped into the clearing, followed by another familiar face: Robert Johnson, pale and moving slowly with the aid of a walking stick, but unmistakably present. Robert, Lily gasped. "But you're supposed to be in the hospital." "Something's can't wait," Robert replied with a weak smile when Sarah told me what Woods was planning. His voice trailed off as his gaze fell on Copper. The Mustang stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the man he had once known as a foe. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, with deliberate slowness, Copper began to approach, his steps careful, measured as if approaching something infinitely precious and potentially fragile. "Look at you," Robert whispered, tears filling his eyes. "All grown up, wild and free. Just as you should be." When the Mustang reached him, Robert slowly extended his hand. Copper sniffed it cautiously, then pressed his muzzle into the outstretched palm. It was a gesture of such profound recognition and trust that everyone watching felt its significance. "You remembered me," Robert said softly. "After all these years, you remembered me enough to save my family when we needed you most." The reunion was interrupted by the distant sound of voices, human voices calling to each other through the forest below. "Woodsman," Tom said urgently. "They're getting closer." Dr. Reynolds stepped forward, her expression determined. "We need to move quickly. I've been in touch with Frank Coleman. He owns the large ranch that borders the west side of these mountains. He's agreed to provide sanctuary for Coer while we fight this legally." "But how do we get him there?" Lily asked anxiously. "Woods has people watching all the roads." "Not all of them," Robert said, still gently stroking Copper's neck. There's an old trail that connects this valley to Coleman's property. It was used by the original Mustang herds before development cut off their migration routes. It's barely passable now, but Copper would know it. Instinctively. Could you show us? Tom? Asked Robert. Shook his head regretfully. In my condition, I'd only slow you down, but I can guide you to the trailhead. The voices below grew louder now, accompanied by the crackling of two-way radios. Woodsmen were coordinating their search, methodically closing in on the valley. We need to move now, Dr. Reynolds, urged Robert. Turned to Lily. His expression serious. Copper trusts you, he'll follow where you lead. Can you do this? Lily nodded solemnly. I can. The trail starts behind the stone marker. For Spirit, Robert explained, pointing toward the cliff where Lily had first discovered the memorial. Follow it up over the ridge, then down through the western canyon. It will bring you directly to Gan's back pastures. He's expecting you. Tom looked concerned. Lily, this is too dangerous. I should know, Dad. Lily interrupted. Copper moves faster with just me, and someone needs to distract woodsmen. Lead them in the wrong direction. She looked at her father pleadingly. Please trust me. I understand him, and he understands me. Dr. Reynolds placed a hand on Tom's shoulder. She's right, Tom. Their connection is remarkable, and every minute we debate this, Woods' men get closer. Tom struggled visibly with the decision, looking from his daughter to the Mustang and back again. Finally, he nodded. All right, but you, take this. He pulled a small two-way radio from his pocket. Stay in contact. Let us know when you reach Coleman's ranch. I will. Lily promised, tucking the radio into her jacket pocket. Robert limped forward, his face pale with exertion, but his eyes bright with purpose. Copper, he said softly, placing one hand on the horse's neck and the other on Lily's shoulder, creating a physical connection between them. Take care of her, like you took care of Emma. Show her the way home. The Mustang nickered, softly as if accepting the responsibility. Go now, Robert urged. We'll create a diversion. Head east toward the lake. Make plenty of noise with luck. They'll follow us instead of you. Lily climbed carefully onto Copper's back once more. The Mustang stood, patiently, seeming to understand the gravity of their mission. She looked down at the three adults, her father, the veterinarian, and the man who had raised Copper from a foe, all united now in their determination to protect this extraordinary animal. Be careful, she said suddenly, feeling much older than her 8 years. All of you, you too, sweetheart. Tom replied, his voice thick with emotion, without another word. Lily leaned forward and Copper sprang into motion, carrying her swiftly toward the stone marker and the hidden trail beyond. Behind them, the adults immediately began moving in the opposite direction, deliberately breaking branches and calling to each other loudly enough to attract attention. The ancient trail was barely visible, overgrown with decades of vegetation, but Copper navigated it with unwavering confidence. They climbed steeply,